Francisco Owano was born in Mandaue, in Cebu, Philippines on June 20th, 1940. Growing up, he had a passion for boxing and martial arts and also enjoyed spending hours at the local movie theater. From an early age, he was an avid comic book reader and later in life would read anything and everything he could get his hands on. He also had a natural talent for drawing and painting, and in high school excelled in both commercial and fine art. Dad and his 3 siblings were raised by their Aunt Socorro after their father passed away when he was 4. Better known as Mama Karing, she was very loving but raised them in a strict household, making sure that each and every one of them went to college. His early ambition was to pursue a career in architecture or fine art, but instead chose medicine after his aunt convinced him to take pre-med after high school. In 1963, he graduated from the Cebu Institute of Medicine and then completed a 1-year rotating internship. Then, after contemplating his next move, he decided to pursue his dream and move to the United States. He immigrated to Chicago in 1966 and completed his radiology residency at Hines VA Hospital in 1969. Dad settled into his residency and began his new life in a big, strange city. In his free time, he did his fair share of dating but had yet to meet the one. At the time, Mom was in Philadelphia completing her own internship before being offered a residency in pediatrics. And wouldn't you know it, her internship just happened to be in Chicago too. Mom and Dad were old family friends from Cebu. So, when Mom arrived in Chicago, they began spending more and more time together. They knew a lot of the same people back home and had a few friends and acquaintances in common. And before too long, they were inseparable. The honeymoon didn't last very long. While Dad's job as a radiologist flourished, Mom gave birth to their first child, my brother Robert. Being an only child certainly had its benefits. He had his own room, there were never any fights over toys or desserts, and there were always photographs, lots and lots of photographs. But as he was finally getting a feel for the lay of the land, he began to get a feeling in his gut that he just couldn't shake. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he knew big changes were on the way. It was quite a shock. Adding one new child to the household was hard enough. Having two was absolutely devastating. Dad tried to explain things as best he could. Sometimes Indian chiefs need more braves, and sometimes generals need more soldiers. In the end, it only took 18 months for Bob to finally warm up to us. By the time Dave was born, Bob was with the program. It only took a few weeks to warm up to him. It wasn't always easy, but with a growing family, we did our very best to get along and coexist. By the time I was in second grade, we'd outgrown our small home. With 4 sons, Dad decided to move the family to Frankfort, Illinois, and into the biggest house I'd ever seen. It was Mom and Dad's dream home, and as a little kid, it felt like we were moving into a castle. Dad worked very hard as a radiologist and wanted to make sure to provide us with a great home. He took great pride in the new house, which he designed from the ground up. He also planned and designed all of the landscaping as well. Thanks to my mom and dad, my brothers and I had an amazing childhood. As we entered high school and eventually went off to college, Mom and Dad finally found some time for themselves. They spent the next several years traveling and took numerous vacations and cruises to Europe, Hawaii, and the Caribbean. It was smooth sailing for several years, and Dad finally decided to retire from radiology. They chose to stay in Fargo, North Dakota, where he'd been a radiologist for well over a decade. They lived a very quiet, simple, and happy life together. In October 2017, Mom and Dad relocated to Arizona to live with me. Dad began experiencing some memory issues which slowly seemed to be getting worse. Once they arrived, I discovered there were many things that were becoming more of a challenge for them. The biggest one was driving. It was no longer safe for them or the general public. So, in addition to being their bodyguard, I also became their cook, chauffeur, grocery shopper, and most importantly, a master of the remote control. With a little help from the kids, of course. For the next several months, life went on. Dad's memory issues continued, and I could also see that Mom was beginning to show signs of memory loss as well. But we did the best we could. We continued our regular trips to Barnes & Noble, the movie theaters, and also all of their favorite restaurants. Dad was always in search of a good game of chess, and on those rare occasions that he couldn't find a partner, he usually had some backup. On July 10, 2018, Dad suffered an embolic stroke. While eating lunch, he immediately became disoriented. His speech became very slurred and impossible to understand. We rushed him to the emergency room where they ran some tests, then soon confirmed our suspicions. They kept Dad for a few days, then sent him home with some new medications. Sadly, Dad was never really the same after that. Within a few weeks, his eyesight declined to the point where he was almost completely blind. He was beginning to need more and more care. Although Mom and I did the best we could, even a few weeks in a top rehab center did very little to change or improve his condition. Eventually, Mom and I had no choice but to place him in an assisted living home. His condition was declining so rapidly, we finally had to accept the fact that it was no longer possible for us to take care of him safely. Several physical and occupational therapists were amazed that we took care of him as long as we did. Although Dad was no longer able to communicate effectively, Mom and I continued our visits where she'd spend hours sitting with him day after day. In 52 years, in good times and bad, through thick and thin, she always stood by his side. This was a true testament of their love, and she was loyal to the end. I think we all hoped and prayed for a miracle, but in the end, we all understood that not everybody recovers and bounces back. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Before and after his stroke, Dad often talked about how he never wanted to live like that. He didn't want the pain. He didn't want the limitations. And he sure as hell didn't want that quality of life. On January 19th, 2019, after being unresponsive for several days, Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep. His entire life, Frank was only sure about one thing. When this life comes to an end, there's a much better, brighter, and more beautiful life waiting for all of us.